Hiraeth. Written by Sailor Artemis. Read by Arashi. Dorothea needs to find someone. Anyone. It's all she can think of as she races for the exit, her feet numb as they beat against the ground, her body crying out in agony as the heat scorches her skin. She can't hear herself cough, even as smoke fills her lungs. She can't see more than a few feet ahead of her, with the blinding light flashing from every corner of her vision, pervasive as it strikes down every soldier in Arianrhod, empire and kingdom alike. Whatever hellish rapture the beast in the distance has wrought, it does not discriminate between its victims. In the distance, just past the main gate, she hears horses whinny as the Empire's cavalry rides for the exit. She swears she sees a red coat and a flash of orange hair at their front. Or maybe it's just more fire, but her dry throat yells for him regardless. Dorothea isn't sure if he can hear her over the screams of the dying, or if he just doesn't want to turn around for a traitor. The further she runs, the slower she feels. The heat pricks her skin, only growing sharper as wave after wave of flame is unleashed from the sides of the fortress. Her knees buckle under the weight of her weakening body, sinking into the hum of the earth like quicksand. She hits the ground, hard, and wonders if this is retribution. When she wakes up, it's in an infirmary in the kingdom's encampment. Petra sits beside her, smiling softly and holding a wet cloth against a burn on Dorothea's arm. Nobody stays after Arianrhod. After the losses suffered on both sides, the war comes to a stalemate. King Dimitri and the knights return to FE3Hopes. Ingrid returns to Galatea. Petra returns to Brigid. And Dorothea heads to Camulus. Civilians flee to Fargus in droves, all seeking asylum. The Church of Saros hosts them where they can, taking donations and offering what few supplies they have, despite being displaced themselves. Perhaps that's why Dorothea feels such a call to help. She, too, has nowhere to go. With no need to command a unit, sitting still in FE3Hopes only proves to make her restless. She could go back to Enbar, but Enbar's only home when she thinks of the people there, and she can't imagine any of them would be very happy to see her now. Dorothea helps in the kitchen, alongside the monks and nuns from the church, tells fantastical stories to cheer up the children, and sings old opera songs to improve morale in the kingdom's injured soldiers. With Flane's guidance, she advances her healing magic too. Many who come through the cathedral doors are hurt from combat, from raids upon their villages, and Adrestian soldiers stationed at the border. She can't save everyone. The makeshift cemetery behind the church is a testament to that. But even keeping just one family whole gives her purpose. As she heals them, they help in turn, sharing tales of their journeys and filling her on all she's missing in Adrestia. "It's worse than it's ever been," they grieve. "We send messengers to the capital for aid, but the army only ever comes to raid villages for dissenters." "I'm from the Empire," Dorothea tells an elderly woman one day, white magic running over a wound on her shoulder, a scrape from a soldier's lance. "It's been a long time, but it seems to have changed so suddenly. I don't remember the Emperor, ever being so neglectful." "Neither do I," the woman says, "but the Prime Minister still runs unchecked, and all he cares about the common folk is if they're any threat to his rule." Dorothea frowns. "Really? I'll admit, never had the best impression of him, but I never thought Ferdinand would—" "No, dear, Lord Ferdinand's father." Dorothea digs and digs and digs and digs for anything that disproves what she was told, or, at the very least, explains it, but everyone says the exact same thing. Duke Eyre leads Adrestia, while Edelgard is too injured to, and neither she nor anyone else in the palace have done anything to stop his tyrannical reign. But that isn't the Edelgard she knows. Injured or not, Adie would have beaten and buried Duke Ire before ever letting him have a say in Adrestian politics again. So why hasn't she? 2 months after Arianrhod, Petra arrives in Camulus. Scars mar every visible part of her body, relics of blades and burns that she does not cover like Dorothea does, but instead wears with pride. The fire in her eyes hasn't dimmed one bit, and she holds herself with all the bearing of a queen, even as she all but carries 2 injured civilians through the doors, even as a glaring cut of her own drips blood down her arm, as 2 priestesses help the men with her and rush them off to cots on the side of the room for water and healing. Petra's gaze lands on Dorothea. She smiles, and there's a relief behind it Dorothea hasn't seen from her since they first reunited in the Kingdom Army after Lord Lenato fell. No, since they both survived Arianrhod. Pawning kitchen duty off on another volunteer that owes her a favor, Dorothea takes it upon herself to see Petra to a spare storage room to get a look at her wounds. She sits atop a wooden crate in front of her and pulls her cloak aside for Dorothea to work her magic along her arm, stitching torn skin back together. "I was not expecting to find you here," Petra says. "I know you chose to stay, but I was thinking you would be in Ferdiad." "Well, the people here need help the most, with everything that's been happening in the Empire." Petra shifts uncomfortably. "I am meaning to ask you about Duke Ire." Dorothea doesn't need to say it. She can't will herself to say it, and the mournful silence that falls over the room does all the answering for her. Petra's gaze drops, with a blend of concern and horror Dorothea's all too familiar with. It surges through her every time she sits in the cathedral, praying to a goddess she isn't even sure is listening, for her homeland to be all right, for Edelgard to know what she's doing by allowing Duke Ire to plunge the Empire into chaos. She must. Hubert's at her side, after all. Ferdinand, too. Neither of them would ever willingly let such terrible things happen to her, or to Adrestia. And yet, nobody who's come through Camulus has made any mention of them. "You didn't hear anything from the Empire when you returned to Brigid, did you?" "I am afraid not," she says, and Dorothea's heart sinks. If anyone was likely to, it's Petra. She didn't betray the Empire like Dorothea did, after all. She only made the best choice for her home. "If the Empire does not fall, I am thinking Edelgard is waiting for the end of the war to negotiate." If. And even if it doesn't, who's to say that Edelgard will be responsible for negotiations? Duke Ire is nothing so benevolent. He'll lord over Brigid with the same ruthlessness he does Adrestia, assuming he doesn't intend to just destroy it instead. Petra seems all too aware of that fact, fidgeting nervously with the end of her cloak. "I will be speaking with King Dimitri soon. I am hoping he will be able to help." They fall silent again, and Dorothea can't bear the way it rings in her ears, encouraging her mind to lose itself in worry, as it so often does these days. So she changes the topic. "How is Brigid?" she asks. "I imagine it was nice to see your family again." "It was wonderful." Petra smiles sympathetically. "I was grateful for it. I know not every home is being so easy to return to now." Funny she'd say that, considering how long she was kept from Brigid. But she's right. Things have changed. Dorothea knows Petra speaks of Enbar and the opera company. But deep down, she feels a longing for something different, something shapeless. There's an inkling of it here, feeling Petra whole and real beneath her hands. Worries Dorothea didn't even know she held about her getting hurt or dying flicker from view just as easily as the blood in her wound does from the healing spell. The magic fades as she finishes, but Dorothea rests her hands on the scarred skin of Petra's shoulder and lets herself breathe for a moment. listening to her talk about her family and home. Petra's safe, she reminds herself. Everyone else must be too. The passing months bring the chill of Fargus, and between the church's limited space and the kingdom's struggle with the border, Dorothea's working harder than ever. Her hands sting with the magic constantly pulsing through them, and the burns across her back and arms ache with a heavier workload, always calling her mind back to Arianrhod and the people she hasn't seen or heard from since. Petra's the saving grace, the eye of this hopeless, war-torn storm. She's away in FE3Hopes frequently, speaking with Dimitri about Brigid and offering aid on the front lines, but she always seems to make her way back to Camulus when Dorothea finds herself missing her most. She teaches swordplay to the children and shares stories about spirits and heroes from her country that the clergy doesn't seem very fond of, while Dorothea can't help but get distracted listening to them. Passing by in the back of the church where they sit, she slows down just enough to hear the pride with which Petra finishes her tale, and the levity and laughter she inspires in usually such solemn children. "Do not think I have not noticed you listening," Petra teases as she stands, the children quickly ushered off for dinner. "Though I am thinking I have told you these stories before." "You have, and they never get old." Petra helps her gather laundry, something she started doing during her first visit to Camulus, and then promptly refused to stop doing when Dorothea insisted she take it easy and enjoy her visit. She tossed dirty blankets and clothing into the basket Dorothea holds, walking with her through the now empty cathedral. "If you would like, I could be telling you more about Brigid. There must be at least one story you have not heard." She pauses, and then lights up. "If not, then we will have to be making new ones in Brigid together." Dorothea stops. She holds the laundry basket at her waist, as Petra turns to look back at her. "Is that an invitation?" she asks. "For after the war? If you would like it to be." There's a sudden weight in Dorothea's chest, put there by the genuinity in Petra's smile. It aches through her, a desire to return to the easier days, where they first shared those stories on the floor of her dorm room. The days where all their friends were right there, and not on the other side of the battlefield. The days she knows she can no longer return to. As sudden as it is, Dorothea knows she shouldn't be hesitating so much. She has no home to return to, nowhere to go when the war ends. Still, some small part of her clings to the hope that things might turn out all right, and maybe the Empire and the Kingdom still have a chance of finding peace, and she can return to Enbar and— "I'll think about it," Dorothea forces out. Because who is she kidding? There's only one way this war ends. A few days later, Petra leaves for FE3Hopes. Dorothea runs through the motions, trying not to think too hard about the state Adrestia's in, or how the most she's heard of her former friends in the capital is that Edelgard's injured, or what she plans to do after the war, because she doesn't even know what she's doing now. A new group of refugees come from Enbar, and one tells her he worked in the Imperial Palace until just a few weeks ago. Dorothea knows better than to eavesdrop as he speaks to the others, but finds herself drawn anyways, hopeful for even the smallest piece of new information. She gets it, but she still finds herself wishing it didn't.
"Not since Lord Ferdinand and Marquis Vestra disappeared. It's a shame Her Majesty only has the Prime Minister now."
"Do you ever regret siding with the kingdom?" Petra looks up at Dorothea from where she sits across the room, one of the church's smaller offices, converted into a bedroom when Dorothea agreed to stay in Camulus. She sets her book down on the desk and frowns. "No," she says. "It was between Adrestia and Brigid, and I must always be choosing Brigid. I do not regret the things I do for my people." She's learned how to read her easily. Or maybe Dorothea's guilt is just that obvious, because she follows up with, You were choosing your life. There is nothing wrong with that. I was choosing my life too.
But you'd still give it for Bridget,
Dorothea chokes out.
Adrestia's my home, and I couldn't even...
Her chest has been carved hollow, replaced with nothing but regret. It burns her, phantom pain that's lingered since that day in Arianrhod. She's set ablaze by her own mistakes, numb, like she's about to fall into the heated stone of the fortress all over again. Because it's retribution, isn't it? She's been paying for betraying the Empire since the day she left. She has no right to bemoan this loss, when it was her choice to leave. Even if the only other option was death, Hubert and Ferdinand would die for Adrestia. So why couldn't she? Why is she here, sitting in Camulus, and doing things that barely help, as the two of them might be losing their lives in the Empire? Petra gets up, takes a seat on the bed beside Dorothea, and much as she did after Arianrhod, reaches for her. Her skin is rugged and calloused, but when she places her hand over Dorothea's own, Dorothea knows nothing more comforting.
I just want to know that they're okay,
Dorothea whispers.
I know Ferdy and Hubie wouldn't die so easily, but they wouldn't just leave Edie behind like that.
They may be helping her by leaving.
I hope they are. I hope that's all it is.
But hope is so fickle and distant here, an utterly helpless emotion, rooted in theorizing, based on the few snippets of information she gets that may not even be entirely correct. Dorothea wishes she could go back, find them, and just see them, and know for certain that they are alive and doing all they can for her. I hope so too, Petra says. Dorothea leans over and rests her head on her shoulder, closing her eyes and trying to ignore the ache in her chest. 5 months after Arianrhod, an unsettling feeling grips the church. Soldiers are called back to their stations across Fargus. The length of Petra's visits grow erratic as she's called back to Ferdinand more often, and though Dorothea knows exactly what's coming, she tries not to think about it. But there's no avoiding the inevitable. A somber glint in Petra's eyes as she hands over a letter marked with the bladed seal and says, King Dmitri is requesting our presence on the front lines. With the alliance, we will be moving to attack the Empire.
Oh!
Dorothea opens the envelope, skims the politely scrawled message, signed by the king himself, and fails to stave off the dashing of every single one of her hopes, as foolish as they were.
I guess it has been a while, hasn't it?
Dorothea, Petra begins, hesitant, as she takes an unsteady breath. You could be returning to Adrestia, if you want.
I'm sorry?
I know, Duke Ire. To be saving my home, my loyalty must be to the kingdom, even if my heart does not. But you... Petra almost reaches for her, but quickly stops herself. Nobody would be stopping you if you left. You could be helping Edelgard, or finding Hubert and Ferdinand. Dorothea blinks, in disbelief that she's even suggesting she desert the kingdom. It's a terrible thought. But she could. It would be risky, re-entering Adrestia, but simply leaving the kingdom might be enough to get her back in Edelgard's good graces, and even being interrogated in the dungeon is better than knowing so little about what's happening there. She weighs it, and then looks back up to Petra, staring at her like she's preparing to say goodbye, and Dorothea realizes she doesn't want to. She's lost so much, left so many people behind, and the thought of doing the same to Petra, as willing as she seems to be to let Dorothea go, fills her with the same ache for home that she's now finally come to understand.
No,
Dorothea says.
If you're returning to the front lines, I am too. But We'll figure out what's happening to Adrestia eventually, but I'm not leaving you behind to do it.
Dorothea reaches for her hand, and Petra smiles, relieved again. She squeezes it gently, and the ache is gone.
I'm not leaving your side, Petra. I'm not losing you too.
Because Petra is right here, the home Dorothea yearns for, and she's going to hold on to her until she no longer can.